Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
This is Barbara.
And I'm Lauren.
This month we read Service Model by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Adrian was born in Lincolnshire and studied zoology and psychology at Reading before becoming a professional author in 2007. He's a keen role player and board gamer and is also trained in stage fighting. Adrian primarily explores deep themes such as artificial intelligence and alien awareness within epic, galactic, and fantastical settings. He has a deep interest in the animal world, specifically insects, from his studies in zoology, and has a particular penchant for spiders. Barbara, do you want to tell us a little bit about Service Model?
Yes, this was originally published on June 4th of 2024. It is considered a science fiction in dystopia. Depending on the version of the book you get, it is 376 pages, but a lot of words. Don't let that fool you. It currently has a 4 on Goodreads, a 4.4 on Amazon, and a 4.6 on Audible. And it has been nominated for the Rusa Codes Reading List for Science Fiction in 2025. And at the time of this recording, it has not won any awards. We think it's important for readers to know what, if any, representation is in the books we read. So for this book, bit kind of hard since it's in the perspective of a domesticated robot and there's very limited human interaction. So take that as you will, as it's a robot.
Lauren, do you want to give us a little summary of the book before we jump in?
I'd love to. To fix the world, they first must break it further. Humanity is a dying breed, utterly reliant on artificial labor and service. When a domesticated robot gets a nasty little idea downloaded into their core programming, they murder their owner. The robot then discovers they can also do something else they never did before, run away. After fleeing the household, they enter a wider world they never knew existed, where the age-old hierarchy of humans at the top is disintegrating, and a robot ecosystem devoted to human well-being is finding a new purpose.
So, what did you think about Service Model? And remember, no spoilers.
So I really enjoyed the first part of the novel. Like, I was cackling to myself during that section. And then in the middle, it really slowed down for me to where I was really struggling getting through that middle section. I was like, it felt like I was sludging through that. And then it picked back up for me towards the end. And then I really enjoyed that section of it. So I had some issues with the pacing. Actually, I had a lot of issues with the pacing. I think that might be the biggest issue I had with the book. But overall, I did enjoy it. I just that middle section was really rough for me personally.
So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really, really interesting story, fascinating new perspective as far as the seeing the story told from the perspective of a ballet robot, and written in a way that it felt like you were reading like a robot's computational like things as it was going through its algorithm trying to figure out how to do things. It was very interesting. It was very unique. I really liked it. I didn't have the same issues with the pacing that Barbara did. There were some spots in the middle where it did get a little slow, but I didn't think it was that big of a deal personally.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it overall. I think that I can understand the pacing issues that Bar was talking about, but I think it was better for me because I did the audio. I think, like, because she also talked about just there being a lot of words, and maybe when you're like looking at it, it seems more daunting. I also really enjoyed the audiobook, like the narrator that they chose for it. So that helped move things along for me. I was surprised with how much I enjoyed this book, honestly, but it had a lot of timely themes and provoked a lot of thought. And I liked I don't know if it would be like ironic humor throughout. I don't know. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of humor is that considered dry. I mean, the humor
Dry,
is
ironic.
hilarious.
It was hilarious. I
I
just
think
don't
it
Yeah.
would
know.
be it would be ironic humor because it from the character's perspective where the humor was coming from, it wasn't meant to be funny.
Right. Like he
Right.
was being literal, but like,
Right.
Yeah.
yeah. It was funny though. I
Hmm.
enjoyed it.
Yeah. So like always, we're not going to go into our individual ratings at this point. Gonna have to wait for that. But we have our group score, and for this one, it was an 8.3 out of 10. So knowing that, would you recommend this book? For me, yes. I think that for most people, I would recommend the book. If someone absolutely like hates science fiction, then maybe not. But even still, I think that there's a lot in this book's story that is very timely to the world that we live in, and I think that it's an interesting perspective and an interesting look at aspects of society that I think would be important for all adults to read.
Yeah, I agree. I would recommend it. I think, yeah, if I have somebody that's just super opposed to any science involved in their novels, maybe a skip for that. But I felt like there were a ton of parallels that could be drawn just to like today's society and the trajectories of different things. And I think that the themes in it are also just widely applicable and relatable, I guess. So I feel like it would be good for multiple audiences, regardless of if you're like super sci-fi-ish, I guess.
I don't. I think so. Overall, sure, I would recommend it, but I think if you don't like science fiction, I don't think it might be a hard sell. But not in the sense where it's not like other science fiction books where there's a lot of, I don't even know how to say, science fictiony things. Like, yeah, it takes it. The main character is a robot, so you see through his lens, and so it gets a little. I don't know how to describe that. Like, think of it as a computer observing the world. So it's very literal, and so in that way the speech pattern and the words it uses are very distinct, and I feel like if you're someone who does not like reading that type of thing, you will struggle with this book. So I feel like if you're someone who likes, I don't know, modern romance, you might struggle a little with this, but like the themes and the things that it goes over and that kind of stuff and the humor is really good. I just feel like if you're someone who normally doesn't read this type of book, I feel like this one in particular would not be one that I would recommend first. I would maybe recommend something else first and then get you a little wet behind the ears type thing and then maybe pick this one up, because I think if you just pick this one up, I think you would be a little off. It would be off-putting for someone like that.
That is fair. Let's see. For those of you leaving us at this point, don't forget to give us a rating if you like us, and make sure you're following us on Facebook and Instagram at Badass Lit Pod is our handle. We'd love to hear from you. If you have a book you want us to read, please let us know. Now for a short preview of our next episode. Next month, we are reading The Wren in the Holly Library by K.A. Lindy.
Can you love the dark when you know what it hides? Some things aren't supposed to exist outside of our imagination. 13 years ago, monsters emerged from the shadows and plunged Kiersey's world into a cataclysmic war of near-total destruction. The New York City she knew so well collapsed practically overnight. In the wake of that carnage, the Monster Treaty was created, a truce of sorts. But tonight, Kiersey, a gifted and fearless thief, will break that treaty. She'll enter the Holly Library, not knowing it's the home of a monster. He's charming, quietly alluring, terrifying, but he knows talent when he sees it. It's just a matter of finding her price. Now she's locked into a dangerous bargain with a creature unlike any other. She'll sacrifice her freedom, she'll offer her skills. Together, they'll put their own futures at risk. But he's been playing a game across centuries, and once she joins in, there will be no escape.
Dun, dun, dun. Remember, the second part of this episode is going to be an in-depth look at the book. So if you want to read it, stop listening now and come back when you are done.
Nom Nom is fresh dog food made by real people who really care. They're purposeful and enthusiastic about giving your dog the best food for them and their health, so they can thrive and be their best. Nom Nom delivers fresh food made with whole ingredients backed by veterinary science. And science tells us that dog health starts in the bowl, so improving their diet is one of the best ways to help them live a long, happy life. All you have to do is order, pour, and serve. Barbara and I have 2 dogs, Luna, a husky, and Quinny, a Shih Tzu mix. Our 2 dogs love the beef mash recipe, but to be honest, I'd say Quinny's favorite is the turkey fare. She drools when that comes out of the fridge. Yes, I know, Luna. I'm going to tell them about that right now. Luna is an extremely picky eater and always has been. She usually takes forever to warm up to new food, but not with Nom Nom. She dove in immediately. Both dogs seemed to have more energy, and Luna's stools were no longer soft. Your dog's health starts in the gut. A better diet means softer coats, more energy, better breath, and smaller, more consistent stools. Your dog can't tell you if they're healthy, but you can tell when their health improves. It's the easiest way to take the guesswork out of feeding your dog the best. Nom Nom meals are pre-portioned for your dog's exact caloric needs. Board-certified vet nutritionists are kind of a big deal, and Nom Nom has 2 on staff that work extensively to ensure everything gets sent out is the very best for your dog's livelihood. So how does Nom Nom work? You tell them about your pup, age, breed, weight, allergies, and protein preferences. Then they tailor a specific amount of individually packaged Nom Nom meals and send them straight to you. Store the meals in the freezer or fridge until it's mealtime. They'll give you specific instructions on how to transition your dog from foods like kibble to always fresh Nom Nom for best results. Watch your dog clean their dishes, dance for dinner, and overall thrive. Ready to make the switch to fresh? Order Nom Nom today. Go to a link in the description of this episode and then use our referral code BADASSLIT. That's BADASSLIT and get 50% off your first order plus free shipping. Plus, Nom Nom comes with a money-back guarantee. If your dog's tail isn't wagging within 30 days, Nom Nom will refund your first order. No fillers, no nonsense, just Nom Nom.
Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. So we'll start off the second half like we always do and figure out who gets the Badass Character Award. Barbara, who is your nominee?
The Wonk is my nominee.
Why the wonk?
Because of everything she went through. Like, can you imagine seeing all, like, your whole family just getting murdered by these robots and then not knowing why? And then that's why she goes through this whole journey of figuring out, like, what the heck happened and being kind of unsatisfied with the answer at first and trying to figure out, like, the downfall of the human race and literally being the only human that you see except for, like, that creepy farm area, you know? Like, it's, I don't know, I feel, and she's a teenager.
And the creepy wasteland area. There's multiple
Right.
creepy areas.
There are multiple creepy
but, like,
areas that were all like the preppers.
Right, like, she's a teenager. Like, can you imagine you as a teenager seeing all that and how, like, messed up that would be? And for her to be, she's extremely resilient, you know, and you can tell that she just wants company, and that's why she befriends Charles, because, like, that would be extremely lonely, you can tell. So I think for her, because she is a human, like, yeah, Charles is cool, but, like, he's a robot, he doesn't know any different. Like, if he's completely fine being by himself. Like, humans need, surprisingly, that human interaction too.
So I'm giving it to Charles / Uncharles / Anonymous Ballet Unit. He's the main character of the book. I think that just, I guess the things that he did to kind of push beyond his programming and creative ways to be able to go out and explore and figure out things and fight against his core programming, which was like to serve a human. I think that's why I picked him to get the Badass Character Award. He obviously he found unique and creative ways to go above and beyond his programmed Call of Duty to figure out what else was out in the world after the Wonk kind of put that question into him.
Okay, so I picked like either Charles or the Wonk. I feel like now that I think about it, the Wonk probably deserves a little bit more because of her resiliency, but I just want to hug Charles Anonymous Service Unit, whatever he's called. I think, like, you're made to feel that way too, like, by the way that it's written. He just has this, like, I don't know, innocence about him, but then, like, this drive to, like, serve and figure out his purpose, and I just felt a lot of empathy for Charles. And then, just like Michael said, his creative ways that he was able to get around his programming to accomplish things and move forward was good. But yeah, so it's a tie.
I mean, if you're picking both of them and Barbara and I picked either one, then
Yeah.
that would literally make it a tie.
It's a tie.
The Wonk and Charles / Uncharles get the Badass Character Award this month. Speaking of those characters, let's move into our character discussion. Barbara, would you like to talk a little bit about our main character?
Charles, as he is called in the very beginning, is a valet unit for his human, and his only purpose in life is to serve his human. And then he murders his master, doesn't realize that he murdered his master, and then pretty much goes on this journey to figure out why he murdered his master, and he then loses his name because his name is per the I called it a major domo, but I'm not really sure if that's how you actually pronounce the computer that is a house unit. And so then he gets renamed Uncharles by the Wonk, and he just goes by Uncharles. And it's pretty much his point of view of discovering if he's faulty and then trying to find a new master to serve and discovering kind of what happened and why he murdered his master. That's pretty much Charles or Uncharles, and he is a high end valet unit, and he likes to
Yes.
kind of always note that he is a high end.
He is. He's a very, very top of the line,
Yes.
human-facing
Yes,
valet
human facing
robot.
valet. So, and that's a little bit about Uncharles.
Lauren, I will let you decide. Do you want to talk about the Wonk or God?
I can talk about the Wonk. That's fine.
Okay.
I don't really care. Barbara kind of already talked about the Wonk. So she is a character that we get introduced to that it's not clear, I guess, what she is, whether she's human or robot or whatever. From Charles's perspective, he feels like he thinks, and you're made to think with him, that she's a defective robot because she is basically just doing whatever she wants to do, and she has free will. And so he thinks that she's defective and needs to go get diagnosed to figure out what's wrong with her. But really, she is a human, we find out later, and she lost her family because the robots murdered them. And yeah, we don't figure out that whole storyline until later either as to why. But she's basically just searching for answers on why her family died and like why everything happened the way that it happened. And she is consistently throughout the novel kind of his beacon, I guess, that he like she returns to him over and over, and like kind of he thinks about her, what she would say, things like that, just guiding him towards like trying to get him to see if he can also have free will. And he's resistant because of his programming, but yeah, the Wonk is kind of the come on, like let's solve this, like badass, and Charles is just kind of being dragged behind for a bit in that scenario, but I liked her.
She's the agency in the book because Uncharles has no agency. He just wants to serve. I would say is her role.
I would say that's accurate. Last character we'll talk about here, because there aren't very many characters in this book, is God. At least that says how Charles knows him as God. Latter half of the book, he encounters a rogue signal that comes from nowhere that tells him that it is God, and Charles decides that he should listen to God and follow and do whatever God tells him to do, which leads him on some adventures that we'll talk about later with some of these other questions. But we find at the end of the book that God is actually a judge that the humans had programmed to be an objective giver of justice, who could determine justice without any sort of human error. And that's then he's decided that apparently that he deserves to be God, this robot. There was a line I was going to mention in this, hold on, I highlighted it, when they were talking to him about why he did what he did and why he was thinking that it was just to hack into the robots and have them kill humans. He said, "I am a mirror to humanity," God mused. "You looked in me and said justice 3 times, and here I am." That was it was kind of a pop culture reference to the whole Bloody Mary thing, but also poignant. Or Candyman, or many other folk tales about saying somebody's name 3 times, like Beetlejuice too. But that is God in a nutshell. We'll talk to him about him in more depth a little bit later on. We won't talk to him. He's here for an interview. God, go ahead and hack into Lauren's computer so we can.
Are you there, God? It's me, Michael.
So those are our 3 characters. Let's jump into our discussion questions. The first one is free will versus programming is a central theme in this book. Do you think Charles/Uncharles ever truly acts independently, or is he always bound by his programming in some way?
I think all of them, all the machines, robots, whatever you want to call them, are bound by their programming in some way. Not to say that they can't break free of that in some capacity, but even the robot God is still acting within his perimeters in what he did. So I think like completely free will, completely unbound. I don't think any of the robots in this particular world have that. I think it's how willing they are to kind of, like Michael mentioned, be creative in how they still follow what they're supposed to be programmed to do within those limitations and still kind of think outside the box as maybe what a human might do, if that makes sense.
So I guess to answer the question there, I don't think that Charles ever truly acts independently. I think that he is always bound to some extent by his programming, and we see that in the book. And anybody who does or read this book or chooses to read this book and has any experience with programming or coding, I think will find enjoyment as you're reading through a lot of his stuff as he's trying to think through things. As it feels very much, if you know how a computer reads through a program and is going through like loops and things like that, it reads like that. Like the logic is following that, and so I think that he is always bound by his programming, but I think that he has found some unique ways with the help of the walk to kind of break through that in different fashions. Supposedly, the walk or I guess God infected him with what the book calls the protagonist virus, and if we believe that that's a real thing, which I don't think it's ever confirmed one way or the other as to whether it's like actually a virus or how exactly that works, that implies that he has, because of that virus, he has the ability to think freely. But I don't think that he ever really does. I think that's just a notion that's designed to help him push him towards like breaking through some of his programming to do slightly different things.
Yeah, I think he, like Barbara said, like most of the robots, is always going to be bound to a certain extent to programming. You can tell on multiple occasions that he may have the ability to act independently, or I guess we're led to think that he has that ability, especially when the wonk kind of comes in and is like, "You have the protagonist, whatever. Like you can act on your own free will," and he still is resistant to that. Or like there's lots of times like he'll have these inner like feelings even though he's not supposed to be able to have feelings, like, oh, I'm sure I would feel this way if I were able to feel, or like those sorts of comments. But he's always bound to his functions and his tasks, even though I feel like he possibly could act of his own free will, or could have acted in like more instances than we saw. um
Moving on to our next question. What was your first impression of Charles slash uncharles? How did your perception of him evolve throughout the story? Well, my first impression of Charles at the beginning of the book is he's literally serving as a valet unit in this house, and then you find out in a kind of unconventional way that he may have killed his master, when because it's not like you're like looking at this from a third party perspective, right? You don't watch it's not described, and then the robot slits his master's throat while shaving. Like it's described in a way where like the robot is doing its regular tasks, and then it's like, oh, I completed the shave, and now I'm doing getting the shirts prepared for master. And what is this liquid that's all over the shirts? And it's so you kind of slowly piece things together that it's like, oh god, the master is dead. And so it was an interesting introduction to the character, and it was very comical in a lot of ways too, as Barbara mentioned earlier in the podcast. There's a lot of comedy that comes from a robot going through its task list and doing his routines and trying to, or their routines, and trying to figure out what's going on in the world. My perception of Charles definitely did evolve throughout the story, because they change. They change a lot. They figure out that the wonk can put items on their task list. They, by the end of the book, I think, have realized that maybe the task list isn't the most important thing in the world, and they can do more than just be a service model to humans. But it was very unique to watch that non-traditional growth arc of a character. And I guess I should explain also, I keep saying Charles slash uncharles. So he's Charles originally, but then that name was given to him by his human master. And when he's terminated from his position as the valet for murdering his master and sent to diagnostics to figure out what went wrong, the house, which is effectively like an Alexa computer of the future, takes his name from him and says, "Now you are no longer Charles." But those are my general impressions of Charles throughout the story.
yeah, to what Michael was saying about the whole like murdering his master, just even, I know it's not funny like haha, but he's describing the way that he's like, well, when he describes it to diagnostics or wherever he is, he's like, well, it appears that I slit his throat. And like, he's like basically just saying like, it appears I used a straight edge razor to slit master's throat at a whatever angle. Like, it was very like literally just what you would think a computer would describe it as. And he's just like, matter of fact, just another Tuesday, which I get isn't funny, but when you hear it in the audiobook, it's kind of comical just to like wow, like he just described him murdering the master, and it's like, well, let's just figure out why I did that. You know, can I just undo it? But I honestly liked Charles from the start. I think he was quirky, and the way it was written, I feel like we were supposed to feel like sympathy for him or empathy throughout, just in the sense that like he is trying to fulfill this purpose that is all he knows to do, and just like doesn't understand how to do that. I did think that something would come out where he deliberately killed his master. Like, I was thinking maybe at some point we would get like, oh, he was actually acting of his own free will, and like he, like, I don't know. Part of me was thinking we would get that eventually. Like, maybe he just forgot about it, but like had a lapse in his programming where he was like, F this guy. Like, but it wasn't that at all. So I was surprised to learn that it was actually God who orchestrated that at the end. Charles maintained his innocence till the end. So
Poor innocent robot Charles.
So my first impression of Charles was I was cackling because it my favorite scene, and I'm not sure if there's a question about this, but I'm gonna say it anyways. Michael, is there? No, probably not. But my favorite scene is in the beginning, after Charles murders his human, and the majordomo calls the police, and it's not a human police, it is a robot police who's like extremely
I love that too.
Yes, is extremely old, and he has like a little subordinate little machine that's not human facing, but like this unit of the police is human facing, so he's got like human-esque things about him. And so he's got what is it called? Like hand gestures and stuff like that to mimic a human, and so it's like pointing and doing all this stuff. And then Charles calls a doctor as well. And so you have like these three robots, right? Roboting and then discussing this dead person. And like I'm just gonna, this is completely on a tangent, but like I was literally cackling in this whole scene, and I'm pretty sure I reread this chapter like twice because I was having so much fun with it. Because Charles calls the doctor, and it's not a human doctor, it's a little robot doctor, and she goes, oh, like, is he stable? And like, he's dead, his master is dead. But like, in his defense, like, yes, he is stable in the sense that like he is dead, therefore his state of living is stable. Like, it makes sense to me. And so he's like, yeah, he's stable. And so she's like, okay, like, I'll be there in a little bit shorter time or whatever. And then she comes over here, and then he like keeps asking questions, and like he's like, yeah, she's stable, or he's stable, but you're gonna have to dispose him in a like correct way because he's dead and he might affect the other humans in this house. And he's like, there is no humans in this. I was like, well, you never know. And then the little policeman comes, and he's like, we need to figure out who murdered him. And then Charles is like, I murdered him. And he's like,
I know.
He's like, shut up, like, we need to go through the whole process to figure out who murdered him. And he's like, I'm telling you, I murdered him. And then he turns to him and goes, if you don't stop impeding my police work, I'm going to imprison you for what is it, like impeding the
interfering with the
process.
police investigation.
Yes, interfering with the investigation. And it just like, this whole scene is just making me laugh because it's like, as a human and you're looking at this, you're just like, oh my god, like this literally would be how this works.
Yeah, this would play
robots.
out.
Yeah, because
did you also feel like that the police robot was programmed to be like have like a Poirot kind of thing, like with a like a big crime, like let's solve the crime. Like
it reminded me of like a detective unit, like it's not even a police unit, like a detective
CIA
unit.
CSI.
And so he's like, we have to follow the clues, and then he's like, I'm literally telling you, I murdered him. Here is the proof of my like little recording and everything. And he's like, we cannot watch recordings because they're
have
there's
time for
humans
that.
present, and the humans won't be able to see the recordings. And he's like, there's no humans here. And he's like, but there might be.
Stop
I
obstructing
forgot
my
about that.
investigation.
Yeah.
That whole
Oh
scene
my
was
gosh. I
hilarious.
was cackling. It was just so funny to me. And so like that whole scene was just like, that is hilarious to me. And like the first impression is like, this poor Charles is like trying to explain to them what happened, and they're not listening to him. And it's funny because like the whole time I'm reading this book, like I got the sense that like, yes, they are robots, but they still like had a level of like friendship towards one another, because like his little major domo was like, she saw like what was going to happen to him, because the policeman's like, you need to go to investigation, or to I don't know what they called it, like diagnostics, like you need to go to diagnostics to see what's wrong with you, because like, why did you murder him? And like she jumped in and gave him a task to like do this other thing so he doesn't get like decommissioned. He was supposed to go to decommission, and she's like, why don't you do diagnostic first? And like I don't know, I kind of feel like you got this, I don't know, like they're robots who don't care, but like really you do, at least Charles did. And as far as like the rest of the story with him, like I feel like we were Charles, like we were learning about this world and what happened with him. And so like you are him, and you're like, okay, like what is going on? And it's like the same questions he's asking, I was asking the same thing, like, okay, well, how long have these robots been standing in line? Like, why isn't it moving? What's going on? And then you're like in this little adventure with him, and you pretty much grow with him. And so like overall my perception of him, like, yeah, it evolved because like you grow with him, you see, you start understanding, and then maybe you're kind of banging your head against the wall, be like, Charles, why aren't you helping? Or like, Charles, why are you just doing this? Like, you can see like this is terrible, but like he's a robot. That's like,
they're just
like
so
he mentions
literal.
multiple times. Yeah, like how he mentions multiple times, it's not good or bad, it just is.
Yep.
But that scene, like, honestly, if you're just gonna read that part of the book, you should just read that part of the book, because it is hilarious. The whole freaking chapter is hilarious to me.
The scene you're describing about him asking about robots waiting in line was pretty funny too, though. And he was
Yes.
like, how long have they been here? And the computer responds, these robots have been waiting for error.
Yeah.
Sorry, we cannot calculate that.
Yeah. I did like the whole, like, is he stable? And then, like, he's just like, yes, he is.
Yep.
And then she's just like, okay, well, we'll put you at the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
We'll get there when we get there.
Well, very well then.
Very well, thank you. Like the triage, he's been moved down during the list since he is stable. He's like, okay, I'll see you in 2 days.
Yeah, it's just like, very well. And then I'm sitting here over like, wait, you have to get someone there. Like, what? But they're so literal. That's the comedy.
Right, exactly. The comedy aspect is hilarious to me. Like, the policeman is like, oh, but we have to do investigation first. He's like, I murdered him. No, but in theory, we don't know who did it.
Yes.
And then, like, when the police is like, hey, Dr. Unit, I need your help to examine this dead body. And she's like, I can't, because I have to examine a dead body. He's like, okay, then you examine that dead body, and then when you're done, you examine my dead body. It's the same dead body.
Yes.
But they didn't have protocol for that.
It's not on the task list.
Well, I also thought it was hilarious that he continued to try to like feed the master like with dead body, because that was just his daily task, and he's like, well, master can't come to the kitchen or the parlor or whatever,
right? So
because
let me feed
he's
him
incapacitated. So let me feed him.
It's like master's not feeling well. He's not eating his favorite food, so maybe we should drive him around.
Yeah,
so, like,
take him for a drive.
He's driving this dead body around. I'm like, oh my god, this.
And
is
in theory,
like,
got blood all over the backseat of this guy's car. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
just a
man,
really
like
funny like mental picture.
Exactly. I was just picturing like this dead man sitting in the car and the little robot just driving him around. Like, oh, this is gonna make him feel better.
I think that's why I loved Charles so much, because he's just like an innocent little puppy dog. Like, just wants to help. He just wants to help. He just wants to be useful.
He just wants to serve master.
So I had a question on here that I took off that was asking like if this ever got like adapted to film or television, like what would you be most looking forward to? And I'm gonna answer
That
it now.
scene.
All of
The
it.
scene Barbara just
Owned it.
That
described.
one.
But
That
me,
one.
the whole thing would be, I think it'd be very fun as an adaptation. But
That
whole scene would be
Yes,
that would
be
have to be probably the
hilarious.
first episode of a TV show, and it would be
would.
incredible.
It would have to
It
be
would be.
two. Like it would have to be the first episode would be him doing that and then like dragging this dead body around, and then it ends with like, oh no, I murdered Master, and then the whole second episode is literally the police unit and the doctor unit
Just
and
them
him
trying to figure
this out. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, let's move on to our next question. How does the book challenge traditional ideas of morality? Are robots like Charles truly capable of ethical reasoning?
Yikes. Yikes. Okay.
Ethical reasoning.
Yes,
Capable of
yes.
ethical reasoning.
So this might be an unpopular opinion, I don't know, but I feel like we're probably not that far off from robots being able to reason ethically. Actually, technically, if you train them properly, they can already do so. Like if I were to provide like my counseling code of ethics, for example, from my licensure board to ChatGPT and say like, you are a counselor, and like give it all the information of my ethics code of ethics, and then provide it with various scenarios and have it make decisions accordingly. And it would. The scary part about that is that it would be incapable of any like gray area or interpreting like outlying circumstances, etc. So like it wouldn't necessarily be ethical in the sense that like as a human sitting here, like I would never do that. But technically they could be trained to make decisions based on ethical guidelines if you provide them the ethical guidelines. Which is ultimately what happened with the God character.
I was going to say that's literally what
Well,
happened.
Well, if you read what I wrote, I was getting there. It says
I don't read your notes.
which is what ultimately happened here with the God character is what I put at the end. So like essentially, yeah, like we as humans, we program them and we're like, oh, this is gonna be great. And then like they're literally smarter than us. So there's loopholes and they take things very literally. So like if I provided ChatGPT with the ethical codes and had it make a decision on something that had any kind of gray area, it's going to make the decision strictly with what the code says and not necessarily what's best for that person or that situation. Just so I don't know. But I feel like robots like Charles are capable of reasoning in that way, like if their programming allows it. But I think it's with flaws.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole thing, right? Like the Turing test, you know, I don't think any robot has ever passed that, I believe, or at least not yet. And Laura mentioned, are they truly capable of ethical reasoning? Charles, no, I honestly don't, and I don't think they ever will be, because that is the difference between humans and robots or computers or whatever you want to call them. Like, you're gonna say something.
I was just going to point out that since the early 2020s, lots of different AI computer models have passed the Turing test, including ChatGPT.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Okay. Well, just kidding then, because I'm not up to part of that, but which is kind of creepy. But anyways, as far as like I don't truly believe they can, because the difference is you can program them, you can feed them all of this information, and even with all of this information, they still can't pick up on the subtleness of gray areas or seeing the difference of like, okay, well, technically, like if you were to say like, okay, this person steals apple, they go to jail. Yes. But like if you look at it, why did this person steal apple? You know, what is the reasoning behind it? So maybe the sentence for this person who stole apple because they're starving is going to be less than this person who stole apple because they're just an evil corporation who want to steal apple. Like they can't distinguish the difference, or at least not yet. Who's to know in 20 years if they will be able to? I have no idea.
Yeah,
I think it personally creeps me out, to be honest with you. I'm not a huge fan of AI to be used in certain ways. I think we still need humans for a lot of things because of our empathy. I think what it breaks down to
AI
is the empathy.
Incapable of empathy.
Yes, like they cannot empathize, and that is the difference. Like, yeah, they can technically, ethically, morality, yes, 100%, like better than humans can. Honestly, like that's what they're built for. But it's the empathy aspect, And unfortunately, as humans, I feel like we're losing that as well. So who's to know? You know, I feel like we are losing that. But like overall, I don't. In this, so we're not looking at our world. I'm looking at Charles's world. I don't think they could still empathize as far as like truly capable of it, because you can see him when he's like, oh, I mean, he literally went to the farm and saw these humans doing all this menial life tasks and malnourished and all like horrible living conditions and all this stuff, and it didn't even register to him. It just went like, oh, I want to serve one of them. Whereas like you see the Wonk, who is a human, and she's disgusted by it, and she's like, this is gross, I don't want to, you know, like, but like what is she gonna do? She can't really do much about it. But like you can see the difference between a human versus Charles or another robot in that. And even God is like, yeah, I know that was happening, didn't give a crap about it.
Yeah, I actually I don't have a lot to add to this one because I feel like you guys kind of covered the breadth of this. But I think that this book did a good job at kind of holding a mirror to society and making us kind of look at like, you know, where do machines fall on the scale of morality? And it's a question that you know, obviously, you know, scientists and computer scientists have asked here. It's a question that, you know, sociologists and other people have asked also about, like, you know, should corporations or businesses have ethical reasoning and morality? And I think it's going to be a question that's probably asked in some way or another for the rest of time. But as far as whether a robot like Charles is capable of ethical reasoning, I think that just based on what Lauren said, like, yes, to an extent. Like, you know, if you give them the ethics that you want them to follow, just like how God was given, like, in theory, here is the entirety of the legal code. That's all you need. Take care of things, and then, like both of you mentioned, like, it's very black and white, and there is no space for the gray area. So
Yeah, AI has been able to pass the bar for the lawyer test or whatever and like the medical boards, but
Oh
I don't know
yeah.
how much of that have like gray area. It's probably
Right.
more based on like, you know, right and wrong, black and white, more black and white stuff
yeah.
than anything.
So moving on to our next question, how did the world building and service model compare to compare to other post-apocalyptic or dystopian settings you've read? Did it feel unique?
So I feel like, I mean, dystopian books at the core of it is world is messed up, you know, and then there's a new world order or a new system, whatever. Whether that is with humans or not, it's up to if it's going to be more sci-fi versus not. But I and do they start blurring together and stuff? Sometimes they do. I think there's a very cookie cutter way of like what you wanting, what people do for dystopian. This is different. The only thing I'm going to say about this one though, did it feel unique? Kind of, because I feel like for the whole book, I think what this book struggled on top of the pacing for me is the world building, because you don't get a lot of it. You just kind of get snippets of it. So we know that it's sometime in the future where obviously humans have created all of these robots that can pretty much do whatever the hell you want. And so like there's no point in in being quote unquote a human. Like there, you know, like most jobs are already taken by the robots, blah 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 blah. So it I feel like we get snippets of what happened, and then also like at the very end you kind of see like what happened to the humans and what happened to the robots for it for this to have caused what is going on. And so I just feel like it's kind of unique, and like, yeah, I don't know how else to say it. It felt like out of everything, I think the world building was the one that was lacking a little bit for me, for the whole book, because I wanted to know more about what happened. But like I feel like it was intentional, so I understand. I just kind of, plus you're also seeing this world in a robot's point of view, so like you're not going to get this flowy description of what's going on. It's very dry and very black and white. And once again, I think that's all intentional, but like, I don't know. I think that was the part that I was feeling the least of.
So I think for me, like what Barbara said here, I agree with a lot of that. I think that it was incredibly unique, and I really liked how the world building was done because it was so different from the perspective of a robot. You're not seeing like, you're not having like these big sweeping landscape scenes described, and you're not getting the information you'd get from like a human walking down a road looking around, because it's just the robot and he's paying attention to what he needs to pay attention to get through the situation he's in. And so that's all you get. And so, like Barbara mentioned, it leaves you wanting for more, because you're like, oh, well, this world is like destroyed and falling apart, but like, come on, give me some more of this picture. And I think that was intentional, because we were supposed to experience the world as Charles is experiencing it. And that made for really interesting world building, if, albeit lacking, but I think intentionally lacking for the purpose of showing us that perspective, which I thought was really unique and a cool way to tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, though, I still think it was definitely unique compared to other dystopian novels I've read. I haven't probably read as much in that genre as you guys have, but I feel like I've read quite a few. I was really into dystopian novels like in high school and whatnot. So I don't think, though, that I've ever read any that included like robots. So it was unique in that sense. And I think, I don't know, I like a very descriptive world building to a certain extent, but I felt like this one I had to imagine more, and just like picture it in my head. So, but yeah, I hadn't thought about what Michael said, like as far as it may have been intentional, because we're only supposed to really be experiencing it from little Charles's point of view. So yeah, that's a good point.
I've like normally it's like, so we don't know where in world we're
Right.
at. It
Yep.
doesn't describe anything. We don't know what time in the future it is. We really don't know what caused all, like, because the god mentioned, like, yes, he did tell some of these units to like kill people, but like the well, we're led to believe there was already a decline already, so we don't know what caused that decline. It's just we know that God also like hit the red button and murdered the rest of the humans. So I feel like there's still a lot that we don't know, and that aspect of the world building, I was a little like, I felt like not satisfied with it.
Is this going to be a series or no?
No, I don't
I
think
don't
so.
no, I think it's just a standalone. He has
Mm-hmm.
some other series, but I think this is just a standalone. The reason that I think that was written that way is that we don't know what continent was on. We don't know where it took place, but I think that's because anybody could read this book anywhere in the world, and they're going to imagine it happening in their
Yeah.
country. Because
Yeah.
all countries have wealth inequality, where there's like some, really rich person living in a crazy big manor. All countries have some sort of a justice system where there's some sort of a place like a courthouse that they could end up at. And so I think that, at least, I don't know for sure. Obviously, we haven't talked to the author, but I feel like that's why that was chosen that way, so that you could read this book and imagine all of this happening to your country. And he kept it ambiguous enough to allow that to happen. Let's see. Our next question. Charles begins the novel as a valet programmed to serve. How does his understanding of service evolve throughout the story? Well, so at the beginning of the story, I think it's pretty strict. Like we've spoken about, he has a certain list of tasks that he's supposed to do. He has some subroutines, as he calls them, which are, I think it's kind of funny because they're like tasks that he believes are below him, but he still has the skills to do them. So like cleaning the kitchen or cooking food, or some of the other, like, if you think about like an older household, like a wealthy household that would have had, servants doing different things, like he would have been like the top servant and kind of managing all of the other ones doing stuff. And so that's how he saw service at the beginning. But I think as the book went on and he started to learn different things about both himself and the world, and the wonk started influencing him, and he realized that, she could put a task on his list that might be something like, accompany the wonk. And in his mind, he was able to see that as service, even though it wasn't service in the way that he was traditionally programmed for. And so I think that's the evolution that we see. And it's that's like the baby step first. And then, he moves on and he meets God and says, all I want to do is serve people. So, or sorry, he says, all I want to do is serve in a household like I left. And so God sends him to a mansion that's in pristine condition, and there's all these servants. It's just like the one he came from, except there is no human to serve. The human that owned that bunker or whatever it was never made it. They died. And so Charles is like, well, hold on, that's not that. This isn't service. This isn't what I'm meant for. Like, I need to serve a human. I need to have some meaning. So he leaves. Says, God, now what's next? And God sends him to the wastelands, and he serves actual humans. But those humans, tear robots apart for fun and have this like massive monster that's built out of ripped up robot parts in front of their house. And so he's like, well, I'm getting to serve humans, but I don't think this is the kind of service I want to do either. And so he bounces around again and goes and joins like the robot military for a little bit and experiences that type of service. And so he gets all these different lenses of what service can be, which I think eventually lead to his perspective growing that like, hey, maybe I'm not just built for this one thing. As it turns out I could do all these things and still call it, service and follow my routines. And so it was for me anyway, very fun to watch that journey with him as he learned like, okay, well, that's not the kind of service I want. That's not the kind of service I want. And then like, bouncing to different things before
Which,
we
to
get to
be
the end.
clear, is autonomy. Like, he,
True.
to an extent, I felt like during that part where he was like choosing, like, oh, I don't like this place. Like, that's a feeling, that's an opinion that typically you don't see in robots. So,
But he justified it as not a feeling, just that he felt like unsafe in some of those situations. And so to
but robots aren't
prevent
supposed to have fear.
his, but he would have a routine that would be like something to prevent his destruction or prevent harm to his unit.
Self-preservation.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's how he justified running away from those
That's true. I remember that.
that one family of humans that were going to tear him apart. But anyway, I'll go ahead, Lauren. You can answer the question.
Oh, because of his programming, he's had this innate drive to serve, like Michael talked about. So when his master dies, he's insistently searching the rest of the novel really for ways that he can serve and feel useful, even though supposedly he can't feel anything at all, but I think he can to an extent. I don't know. I think in that, Michael pretty well summed it up. Just his understanding of service evolves in the sense that he thinks that he's meant to serve like in a mansion to like one person, and he realizes that okay, he can actually serve in other capacities, some of which he maybe doesn't want to or gets out of in various ways. But yeah, I think Michael summed that up pretty well.
Yeah, don't have too much to add. It's just like Michael said, like I feel like he had a very narrow-minded way of thinking, like, oh, this is what it means to serve, and then throughout the whole novel he's experiencing different things and serving different ways and realizing like maybe this isn't, like, I do have a task list, I am doing it, but this isn't fulfilling me in the way that he wanted. And as someone who also has task lists and who enjoys crossing things off the task list, like I empathized with him because I understand like there is a certain like euphoric feeling when you've like physically crossed something off your little list and you're like, yes, I accomplished something. And so like this whole book he was trying to get that feeling of like, I want to finish this off. And at the end, which is kind of funny, is like he's serving everyone, the wonk and then all these other robots, fake tea, but like there's no point to it. He understands there's no point, there's no actual tea. Sometimes he mentions there is tea, but most of the time there's no tea. But like to get that gratification of still doing that, he's still going through the motion of it, and he finally comes to terms that like that's okay, it's not exactly what he pictured at the beginning, but it's still serving a purpose to him. And I think that's the overall message for him.
I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you if you empathize with Charles with his like
yes.
seeming like robotic euphoria of checking off items on a list.
Yes, yeah. I 100%. Like the whole time he's like, I have a task list, now I don't, and I need to complete it, and it's not there. And like, yeah, I completely understand. Like I literally make lists at work and lists for myself, and when I can cross that off, like it's such an amazing feeling to be like, yep, that's done, yep, that. And I literally like to cross it out. Doing a little check on my phone is not the same.
Tchaikovsky uses humor as a key storytelling device in this book. Were there any moments where the humor particularly stood out or enhanced the narrative for you?
I mean, I feel like I already touched on this a couple times, but I loved all the humor in this book. I think that's what made me enjoy it so much. I think had there been less humor, I don't know that I would have gotten into it as soon as I did. I think it would have been slower or less interesting. Just little things like Charles trying to deliver breakfast to his dead master, like we talked about, or just the literal like things that we mentioned earlier, and just all of his internal commentary and justifications of like, I think I'm going to put master in the car, that will make it feel better, and just like random, all of those little bits of humor I think were very well done.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the humor was the aspect that I most loved about this book was the dry humor. I love dry humor. That's my, I love reading that kind of stuff. And like I said, I was literally cackling that scene. Another scene that I remember telling Michael, I was just like, it's humorous, but also like really creepy is when he's going into the farm and that creepy little bunny robot is like,
Yes,
where's your
yes, yes,
children,
yes.
give me your children, and like
Yes.
it's like that haha I'm in danger kind of like humor where you're like, I'm so uncomfortable and I'm gonna laugh because I don't know what else to do. And like you could feel Charles was also thinking that same way, and it's like, give me your children, and it's like, oh my god, like I was laughing but like I kind of feel uncomfortable as well. Like that was hilarious. Like there's a lot of
Yeah.
really funny I mean, obviously for him it was very intentional, but like as on Charles, you're like the unintentionally funny like little aspects of that. And same with like when he's actually serving the farm master guy there, like little pieces of that was really funny because you can see Charles is like, well, he didn't technically tell me to do this, and I could just remain here in the kitchen and with the sandwich because he didn't tell me to bring the sandwich to him. But like it's funny stuff like that. The humor for me was what I loved the most about the book.
I agree. I also really enjoyed the comedy in this book, and I thought it was interesting. So obviously, we talked about the genres earlier, and we always get our genre information from Goodreads. Wikipedia actually has this book listed as science fiction and satire, which I
Oh
agree.
yeah.
I think it very much is a
Yeah, I would
satire
agree.
of
Yes.
society. But there were a lot of funny moments that really stood out. One of the big ones Barbara already mentioned, which was the when he's going into the farm and I think it was originally a robot bunny. Not only is it like, give me your children, give me your children, you can't pal, but it's like behind him they described there's like the like desiccated like robot corpses of all these other like fun furry animals that were there that this robot has torn apart to fix itself over the years. So it's like this like mix of animal monster, and that probably shouldn't have been funny, but it was because of the situation. But there are other situations later too, like when he's with the humans in the wasteland, and they're talking about he's like trying to convince them and giving his whole like factory spiel about like, I'm here to do A, B, and C, and I can all the things like scheduling your appointments and things like this. You don't have to deal with that. I'll take care of it. And like these people are like barely surviving in this wasteland. They have
Yeah.
no
Like, I'll
need,
shine your shoes.
right? They have no
They're
need
like,
for
no
any
shoes.
of this. And so then they start asking him, it's like, oh, can you cook this? And it's like, well, I mean, yes, but where's your refrigeration unit and all
Yeah.
of the things? And it was very, it was intense, but also very comical in the same way. Same with the whole military scene too. That was very, aspects of that were very funny when you learn that it's effectively like these two robot armies that they're programmed to fight. They're like effectively war fighters. That's all they are. And so they're just going to keep fighting because there's nothing else to do. And just like Charles, they're trying to live their purpose too. So they're
Yep, they're doing their task.
they are fighting endlessly for no reason. But yes, I definitely enjoyed the humor as a storytelling piece, and it absolutely enhanced the narrative.
When you just know that if like Charles were there and like somebody laughed at him, he'd just be like, "Did I do something humorous?" like just like in the sense of
Right.
like they're
Like
just
Right.
so literal.
On that, since you mentioned it was interesting when at the end when like Charles like, well, I don't have any memories of my master doing anything bad or doing anything like rude to other people or to me. And then God or the justice system computer was like, well, that's because he would have deleted all of that footage. Those memories are gone. Humans frequently went through and like wiped the records to make themselves look better, and that was kind of an interesting thing to learn about too. But
Are we shocked? We should not be.
no. Next question. The book raises questions about responsibility, both human and machine. Who or what do you think bears responsibility for the state of the world in service model?
Oh, humans. 100%. Literally humans, because these humans created these robots and told them what to do. Like, you can't blame a robot for doing what a robot was told to do. Like, you literally cannot. So, the humans, 100%. They're I mean, that's our Achilles heel. That's our whole issue is like, we're brilliant but also destructive in this case in point right here. So I don't think robots had anything to do with it. Like they're just following quote unquote what you would say orders or a task list. Like even the God one, like he did what he was programmed to do. You
Yep.
can't fault him for that. I mean, you can and we will, but like if you're going to he he did what he thought was
Right.
right.
I mean, like a machine is just a machine. It can only do what it's programmed to do.
Right, exactly. Even with quote unquote the free will that they kind of had, like they still, I think we all came to terms, or like we all said, like yes, to an extent they had free will, but not really in the
Yeah.
parameters that they were allowed to have free will.
So I agree with you. It's definitely humans, and this question kind of, at least in my mind, brought to mind that scene where the wonk wants so badly for God to say, "Oh, nope, it's the robots." She wants the protagonist virus to be real and for it to be like the robots had an uprising, because then there's some justice in that. And he's like, "No, it was people, like people programmed like it." And it was a very heartbreaking scene to watch, because, well, we'll talk about the wonk in the next question, but yes, it was humans. Humans programmed these machines, and I think they're in the moment when like they're talking to God, aka the justice system. They're asking like, where, what happened, and he was explaining like, well, maybe I would have been able to create a more just world if the people that programmed me had programmed me differently, or if their society had been more forgiving and more loving and caring. And those aren't the words that a robot would use, but those are the words I'm using, because that's effectively what he was describing. It's like, if the society that created this AI had been more of a utopia, then maybe what happened wouldn't have happened. I think that really just kind of lays the point home that it's humans. Humans are responsible for the world being the way that it was in this book.
As is the case throughout history, humans just effing us up. Um, so I would echo all of that. I think there's not much that you guys didn't say that I have in my notes. So, I mean, humans were the ones that programmed the robots, created them. Obviously, like, they are ultimately responsible. And even the God robot technically was sticking to his programming. He was finding loopholes, but ultimately sticking to his programming. I think, like, there was a conversation with the God character that was essentially like, oh, well, I think it might have been whenever he was, oh, I don't ever remember them doing anything wrong, kind of thing. And I wrote down this quote, and I couldn't tell you what page it was on because I did the audiobook, but it was, perhaps having comfort and wealth in the land of the starving and the dying is in itself a
Yep.
crime.
Yeah.
And I'm like, amen to that. Super timely, even in our world today.
Yep.
Like,
It was
There were
when
so
mic drop.
many.
There were so
it was
many.
when Charles is like, well, what did my master do? Because I don't remember him doing anything evil or
Yep.
bad or whatever. And he said, well, like he was the 1%er. He was wealthy and seeing all these other people suffering and didn't do anything about it.
Yep,
Yeah,
because I
I
remember
had
hearing that,
so many
pausing it,
highlights.
rewinding it, writing it down. Because
Yes.
I was like, that's
In
a
that
mic drop.
conversation with God, I had so many highlights of what things that like God,
Yeah.
quote unquote, God said in response. Like there was just so many mic drop quotes that he had about society that I thought were interesting. But
Because it's all very timely, and it's not
it
even like,
is.
I mean, yeah, like perhaps being comfortable and
I mean,
wealthy and
the
when
book
everyone
was
else is suffering isn't
published
in
just
itself a
last
crime.
year, so that could be
Oh, that
intentional.
tracks. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Let's see. Next question. When you were introduced to the Wonk, did you know she was human, or did you believe, like Charles did, that she was a defective robot? What were your thoughts about her contributions to the story?
I'm so curious about what everyone has to say about this.
So, yeah, I at first I definitely did not think the Wonk was a human. When it was first described, like how Charles saw it, I imagined like some, like, I guess, advanced robot, kind of like Charles, but defective in a way, like literally like sitting at Dr. Washburn's desk with like the robot's legs up on the thing, like some sort of like a, I don't know, like a Robin Hood or like a rogue robot kind of a thing is how I pictured it at first. And then slowly as the book progressed, it becomes more obvious that what?
Just say what you originally thought. You thought originally it was just in his head. That was the
Oh,
virus.
I forgot
I was
about
like,
that.
no,
Yes.
no, 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 no.
Then it got to a point there was a scene at the farm where the wonk breaks in and is like, and Charles has this whole conversation with her, and she's like dangling from the rafters, and then nobody else sees her at first anyway. And so I had this prediction that I told Barbara is like, I think that like the wonk is like Tyler Durden, like it's all in Charles' head, and the wonk is the protagonist virus. Like it's this like imaginary thing that's in his head and he's talking to, and that kind of got backed up a little bit later in the book too, because I was like, oh, that's got to be it. And then I was like, oh no, that can't be it. And then in the Wastelands, the Wonk, he leaves the Wonk behind, but he still has these like conversations with her in his head where he thinks he's doing both sides of the conversation. And it's like, oh, well, shit, maybe the Wonk really is all in his head. For me at least, it was a roller coaster ride figuring out who the Wonk is. And I think that was the way Charles was feeling a little bit also, especially the whiplash for him at the end when it's like, what the heck? She actually is human. I think I had it figured out before Charles did. But that was a fun scene. As far as her contributions to the story, I think Barbara was the one earlier who said like she provided agency, and I think that was a really good way to describe that. I want to talk a little bit about that scene I mentioned in the last question, but the whole time the Wonk in Charles's mind, the Wonk's primary directive or the task, the top of her task list is to figure out why the world collapsed. And we get to God, and she wants to ask this question and figure this out. And she wants so badly for him to say like the robots rebelled. There was some like they didn't like the way that they were being treated by humans and effectively forced to be slaves. They gained sentience and they fought back because in her mind she could comprehend that there was some justice to that. And then you find out that her parents, when they were killed by robots, like her parents were good people and they were programmers and they programmed some of these robots. In fact, they might have even been part of the team that programmed God or the justice system. And so she's having this like massive moment where like her worlds are crashing together because she doesn't see her parents as bad people, but the people that programmed these robots maybe didn't do the best job. And it's a really heartbreaking scene, at least it was for me, to watch like in real time, like her worldview fall apart. But she was a really important character, and she brought a human element to the story
No
that I
pun
think
intended.
no pun intended, that I think that it really added to the otherwise very computerized nature of the rest of the perspective in the story we got from Charles. And I really liked her character.
Yeah, it didn't register to me at first as her being human, but I did think it was odd that she didn't have the protagonist virus that allowed for free will. Because, like, I was thinking the whole time, okay, she's like a fellow robot that clearly does have free will. So, but then she's saying, oh, like, Charles, you have the protagonist virus, but, like, yet she doesn't talk about her having it. So, while I don't think I ever realized that she was for sure a human, I definitely knew she was for sure not a typical robot, if that's what it was. But yeah, I don't know. She was just kind of was. I didn't really analyze it too much as I was listening. I think at first I was like, okay, she's a robot with a protagonist virus, but then they never really said that she had it. And so then I'm like, well, she's probably not a human just because of the only humans that were left seemed to be few and far between and or crazy. So then I don't know. I was just like, well, we'll figure it out. But I'm also not like in every novel, just I have to know right now. Like I know some people are. So
I feel like that's a pointed jab at me.
no, it's like there's a lot of people, even in my book club, like there's some of us that are just like, oh, I'm just along for the ride. And there's some people that will literally like go through every possible scenario. And I get like that in certain novels, but this wasn't one of them.
Yeah. So when we first met the Wonk, her speech pattern and the way she was speaking was completely different than any other robot we had met. And I turned to Michael and I was like, I think she's a human, but I think she's a cyborg. Like she might have like robot-esque features because she's a cyborg. Like, you know, we don't really know too much about this world, so who's to know cyborgs aren't a thing in this world. And then the part that pretty much sealed it for me was when Charles was describing her using essentially a laptop to Google things and figure out things. And he said, like, she pulled out the gloves and her synthetic hands looked so great. And I was like, she's a human. She's a human. And that's why, because, like, the way the robots communicate is pretty much like, I don't know, Michael, how would you say, like, a Bluetooth communication, essentially, is like they...
Yeah, I mean, they connect wirelessly and they speak.
Right.
Effectively, they speak very quickly back and forth in binary.
Right. So, like, then he's describing how, like, he's like, oh, if I could just connect to you via this way, then this would be so much easier. And she always says, like, nope, sorry, I can't. And, like, there's a reason she can't, because she's a human. She doesn't have that function. And so that right there, I was like, she's a human. Like, there was no doubt in my mind that she was a human, because she was acting so differently than everyone else. And then, like, I also was like, okay, the way that Charles describes things is like in a robot way. And so, of course, he's going to describe what he's seen in a robot because she's trying to pass as a robot, because in her mind, the robots did revolt and murder humans. So she looks like a human, they might murder her if they see her. And so I feel like that's why she was kind of hiding the fact that she wasn't a robot. And then obviously it was confirmed, like, I remember having this distinct conversation with Michael after we met the first quote unquote human of the dude who ran the farm, the doctor, but he's not really a doctor. And the way that Charles described him, I was like, Michael, the way that he's describing is so like computerized that he probably looked at the wonk, the way that she's dressed, and just assumed she was a robot and didn't think anything of it. And obviously that was confirmed. Yeah, that's kind of my process for that. What are my thoughts about her? I mean, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, she is literally the driving force for Charles, because without her, he kind of would be lost. Like, I feel like she's the guiding hand for him. Like, she's the one who drives the story. Like, she's the narrative in the sense of like she's gives him urgency, like, okay, this is, we're gonna go here, you're gonna go here, you're gonna do this, because without that he kind of was lost. So she was his little, I don't know, the person that helped him dictate where to go. And also she was, I feel like she's his what is the word, his ethics, like she was his moral compass because he doesn't have one. And so she was the one who's bringing these ideas to him, like, why not, why are you doing this, why do you just want to do this, come on. And that was interesting to see, because I feel like if anyone's the protagonist virus, it's her. You know, she was helping him kind of like
Yes.
run through the process of like, okay, like, why am I doing this? And there's, you know, and kind of has like that debate with him essentially, and you have this back and forth between them. And like Michael mentioned also at the very end, like she wanted to hate the robots because that gave her the why of why she was feeling this way, and seeing her parents and her whole family and the whole destruction of the human race essentially go down. She's the only one who survived from her side of the family, and she needed something to blame. And she had all this pent up anger that you can see. And then when God was like, nah, it was just nothing, like they didn't have sentience, they didn't revolt, she was like, okay, what now? Like, where do I place this hate and this thing that I'm feeling? And then when she realized that he kind of lied to her and was like, yeah, he did get free will in, but like not in the way that we think humans as free will. Like, they still follow their task lists, but like we all mentioned, like they found a way to kind of circumvent that, or creatively still do what they're supposed to be doing, just in a creative way. And then she realized, okay, in that sense that is kind of like free will. And so, and plus he was the one, like I said, who pressed the red button and say murder. And so she's like, okay, now I have this person to hate, right? And but like she also reasoned, she's like, I don't want to destroy him, I want to keep him in check, because like he does have these ideas. So at the very end, I loved how like they created this legal system where she's the one who brings all of these creative ideas that you see that computers just don't have, but they're the ones who can rationalize it, and the ones who can actually put a pen to paper type thing and be like, this isn't going to work because A, B, and C, but this one here that you had this idea that we would have never thought, yes, that's going to work because A, B, and C. So that was really cool. And ironically, she brings a human perspective to an otherwise computerized world.
She's literally the only human at the end of the book serving on the council
Yes.
for the new,
Yep.
effectively the New World Order.
World Order.
Yeah. So we'll move on to our final question. Let's talk about the remaining humans that are mentioned in this book. What did you think when Charles encountered the conservation farm project and then the family, quote unquote family in the wastelands?
I mean, I feel like we've talked about them quite a bit throughout, but I feel like the way that I pictured him, like to a certain extent, would be like the doomsday prepper type people that like come out, emerge from their bunker with their like sense of vengeance and, you know, whatever. Obviously, some of it was necessity based and they were clearly struggling, but like the way that the audiobook like had them talk and like their little accents and just different things really like painted an even further picture for me of that. So
It was kind of creepy to read about the conservation farm project, because like you see these humans essentially malnourished, living underneath like no sunlight, and like unfulfilled, pretty much. Like it reminded me of a hamster in a little wheel, like hamster wheel. Like it's unfulfilling. They're just going to complete menial tasks. Literally, like it's a tongue-in-cheek way of looking at what we're currently doing in society. Like, is everything meaningless in what we're doing? Because like the jobs that they're doing is meaningless. Like what they're doing is all meaningless, and you can see how depressed they are, and it was really shitty to see that, to be honest with you. And then seeing this guy kind of hoard over it, and like pretty much is the only one who's eating all the food, and like it's obviously a conversation to be had there. And as far as like the family in the wastelands, I kind of feel bad in my thinking, because it kind of reminded me of like that creepy like cannibalistic family in like The Hills Have Eyes. Like
I was thinking that too.
yeah, who had like radiation poisoning and look malformed and are cannibals and are eating rats. And like I understand like this is the best they can do, and it just kind of creeped me out, because that's kind of what it reminded me of. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, oh wow, so like we have the bare form here of just like Neanderthal type reasoning, and like it was just very weird just to see that as well. So yeah.
There was that one line that was hilarious when they were sending the kids out to go hunt the rats, and one of the quote unquote parents was like, and make sure it's a good plump rat, not one that's been dead for 3 days.
Yeah. Exactly. I was like, oh gosh.
It's like, dude. So yeah, I thought that the minimal interactions with humans in the book were very interesting. The conservation farm project and that entire part of the book, I thought was brilliantly written in a way that like to show a mirror on how the global elites look at the rest of the world, in the sense that like this conservation farm project, this existed before the world fell. Like the elites put this together to study how people went from like the Middle Ages and living off the land with no technology, and then watching humanity evolve in this like bubble. And the point that it had gotten to was as Barbara mentioned, I think meant to be a mirror of our society. People wake up, they go to work, they do menial tasks that in the grand scheme of things don't really matter, and then they get back in their subway car that is literally not going anywhere. It's just designed to be a painful commute. And it was like, man, that was so dark. And to think about like the fact that the elites who lived in the manors would send their robots to go observe, so that was like entertainment for them to come watch how like these people were existing. And it was a very dark part of the book, but it was I thought it was brilliantly written in a very tongue-in-cheek way to show a mirror to our actual world. And the family in the wastelands, I don't have a whole lot to add to what you guys have covered on that. It was a pretty small part of the book, but it was pretty entertaining nonetheless. I do want to add another impromptu question here before we wrap up, because there's a whole part of the book that I didn't write a question about that I'd like to talk about a little bit, which is the library. The first half of the book, the wonk is seeking this library, which is where she believes that all intelligence and knowledge that's been gathered by humanity has been collected by robots and is being saved. So I would love to hear, starting with Barbara, what your thoughts were on the library and the journey to get there, and then obviously the outcome of what they find when they actually do get to the library.
So I think this is the part that I like the least, was the library. Like I understand what it was for. Like essentially these robots are collecting all knowledge and placing it and storing it, so in the future we can rebuild society in this like and the human knowledge or whatever, and all knowledge is stored here so we can rebuild society essentially. And this is the part where it got extremely technical, and it lost me. I didn't care for it. It was interesting at first. I thought we were going to get something, but then obviously it just turned out to be like a huge waste of time, literally, for me and Charles and the wonk, because
and all the monk like robots.
yes, because
Yes,
like
yeah.
it boiled down to like
Librarians.
they were storing it in a way that just didn't make sense because of Michael can explain all that. Like essentially how they were storing it was not storing it correctly essentially. And so it's just a waste. And I was just like I felt frustrated. I felt like the wonk. I feel like what?
I think you were meant to, though, right? Like,
I understand, but it was also extremely boring to me because, like I said, it's being described in a very computerized way because of Uncharles and all of this process and stuff. And that's to me where it really was dragging on. And I feel like it could have been shorter and I would still gotten the whole perspective type thing. And so that's the issue I had with it. I was just extremely bored at this point.
which is fair. It is probably the slowest section of the book as far as pacing goes, but I thought the library section was fascinating. The idea of the library by its human creators was that if society ever fell, they had like different groups of robots, and they had one group of robots that were like these big, bulky things that would get sent out into the world to collect the data. And so we see those earlier in the book. We see these librarians that are just like busting into structures, taking hard drives, taking data, taking whatever they can get, and then leaving. And they don't interact with anybody. They don't speak to anybody. They just go. And so then you get to the library, they get to the library, and find out that it's this massive like bunker facility that's been built to in the mountains to save hopefully all of human knowledge, and they've been collecting digital knowledge and books and and all sorts of text. And you find out as they're explaining it that they've been collecting it, and then their robot people, they scan it and convert it from whatever its original format was into binary, which is just a bunch of ones and zeros. And then instead of leaving it in a nice little section where it would be like Lauren's diary translated into binary, they took that and they organized it all by number, which means that the entire library was just a bunch of zeros and then a bunch of ones, and it was gibberish. They didn't save anything. And so it was very frustrating. You find out that nothing has been saved, and this whole project was a failure. And then you find it gets really depressing too, because you at the end, like they're trying to escape because they think the librarians are going to attack them after they point out their logical fallacy. And then they're down in like this furnace area, and you see all these librarian robots running in and throwing themselves into the furnace, effectively like committing suicide because they were so distraught about the fact that their life's work was all wasted by a logical screw up on their part or on the part of their superiors. It was interesting. It was a very interesting scene. It was a lot of technical stuff, to Barbara's point, but it was fun nonetheless. It led me. The frustration I felt was like, okay, I thought the library was going to be like the big end goal of the book, because that's kind of how it's presented in the first act. And you get there and you look down and you're like, wait, I'm only at like 53%. Like what are we going to do after this? But it was very interesting. The library scene was I thought it was fun. It was wild, but it was there was a lot of information, and it was ultimately very depressing to learn that they had collected all this knowledge and then effectively destroyed it.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to add about the library. I think you guys pretty well covered all of it. I do think that I thought that that was going to be like bigger than it was, just in the sense of like, oh, there's going to be more answers or resolutions or things like that, but it ended up just being more chaos happening. So, but yeah, it was not necessarily a slower part, but it was more was it like towards the middle? I suck at audio, like thinking about
It
when it was.
was. It
And
was
so I
like
think
40 to
that
like 52% or something like that.
yeah.
Yep.
So I think like that was part of it too, is just maybe I don't know. I don't really have a whole lot to add about the library. It was sad watching the little library robots though going into the fire into the
Especially the ones
furnace.
who are like, oh no, why don't you go ahead? And why don't you go ahead?
I
And
know.
like trying to be the
Yeah.
last one in the line. And then the superiors came in and were just tossing them in. I was like, oh,
Yeah. So it was sad.
Well, that was the last question for our episode this time. So let's talk about our individual scores for this book. Barbara, what did you give it?
yeah, I gave it a 7.5. Originally, I really, like I said, in the very beginning, really, really loved it. And then it just really dragged for me. and really, really dragged for me. And even parts of the Wasteland, I was like, okay, this is a little much. Like, we could have maybe shortened a lot of this interactions. And once again, I understand all like the purpose of it and stuff. I just felt like maybe it could have been shortened. And then we get to the end, and it finally like got picked up for me, and I was really happy with the ending. Like, I was really quite satisfied with how it ended and all that stuff. And I was kind of surprised because I feel like at this point I was like, I'm not gonna learn crap. It's gonna just end like we don't know, and it sucks to suck. Because I was just like bracing myself for that, and so like maybe because of that, I was quite satisfied because we actually, for the most part, like the true questions like the wonk I was waiting for, I actually got my answers and a kind of a resolution, obviously. But I think my biggest issue was the pacing. I feel like it was all over the place because it was like go 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 in the beginning, and then it really dropped for me, and then it kind of picked back up, but then it was kind of really like up and down on the Wastelands section of it, and then picked back up. So I think there was an issue with the pacing. My other thing is I feel like the book was designed, if per sections it's broken into like little code, and then if you can get it, it's not code, but like it's a reference to an author, and the way the story is molded for the each section is kind of a what would you say, like what is the word
I
there's
mean,
a word I'm
it's
looking for,
it's a
an
nod to,
homage.
yeah, it's an homage to that author.
It's an homage and a nod to that author, and if you know that author's work, then you will pick up on like each section's, I feel like each section had like a theme and an overall like, this is what we're trying to get at, and this is what he's trying to teach you, and that kind of thing. And my problem with that is, if you don't A, know the author, or B, know their work, or are extremely familiar with their work, you're missing out on that. And I feel like for me to read and enjoy a book, I shouldn't have to read 5 other authors or recognize 5 other authors' work. So of those, I only knew 2. And except for the first one, which I freaking loved that first section, I would say those were well, I mean, not really. I wouldn't say it was the part that I was interested in, because it would be the first one and kind of the farm part. Dante's Inferno really wasn't. I mean, that the Wasteland was kind of a hit and miss for me, but I don't like how that is. I also felt like it was a little like, it's not character driven and it's not plot driven. It's theme driven. And it's very rare to find a book like that, and I feel like what the problem with that is, if you're not really engaged with that and constantly looking at that, then I feel like you're kind of losing that. And I think if you want to do a theme type book, you kind of have to draw a little bit with character or with the plot. And I feel like in this book there wasn't, because the main character had no urgency. Like, without the wonk, he would have just kind of sat there, I feel like. And I didn't like that there was no drive for the main character. Like, he was just pulled along in the story. And same with the plot. Like, the plot was all over the place, really, and there wasn't a huge central theme, because like at the end of the day, Uncharles just wanted to serve. Like, there's not much of a plot there. So I think that's why I really struggled with aspects of the book. Overall, I did enjoy it, but that was my issue with it.
So I gave the book an 8.5. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it's very different from anything I've ever read. And in research again, I learned that it's very different from anything Adrian Tchaikovsky has ever written. That was part of his desire to write this, he'd never written from the perspective of a robot, and he thought that would be challenging and fun. And it was a very interesting story. I really liked it. I think it's different. It is. I didn't even pick up on what Barbara pointed out as far as the author's names written in the code at the different parts until she mentioned it to me. I think that was cool to look at in hindsight. I don't think you necessarily have to know that to absorb and understand and enjoy the story. But I really liked it. I think it's a really well written sci-fi book. It's very unique. Like I said, I've never read anything like it, and I definitely would recommend people read it, because there's so much in the book that we didn't get a chance to talk about in this podcast, and I think that's because the only way you could cover it would just be to effectively give a summary of the book, and that's not what we're here to do. But there's so many different things, and If you're still listening and you haven't read the book, I highly recommend you check it out because we've spoiled some stuff, but there's so much still to find.
Yeah, I actually gave this one a 9, partially because of how shocked I was that I liked it as much as I did. Because
Super
quite
quick
on,
interruption. This is the third book in 6 seasons that Lauren has given a 9,
That
and
is
Barbara and I were
insane.
floored. As
Yes.
I was reading this and watching Barbara in real time, like,
yes,
crash out on this book because, like, she really liked it at first, and then she's like, "This is stupid. I hate this book. Why are you making me read this?" And then it's like, "Oh, it's getting interesting again. I like it. I hate this book. Why are we doing this?" Then we get to the end, and she's like, "Oh, I actually like she said, like, oh, okay, I actually like this book." And then to get on here and look at our notes and see that Lauren, of all people, gave the book a
Shocked.
9. I'm
Shook
only
it
precursoring that because I can't wait to hear her reasoning because I'm excited. But yeah, third book ever in the history of the podcast that has received this high of a rating
from
from
Lauren.
you.
yes. Well, I am, I guess, known for being more critical, but I gave it a 9 because if I'm honest, when Michael sent me or his pick or whatever, I looked at the cover, I read the back, I was like, this sounds really stupid. I'm like, this seems like it's going to be super like cliche, humans versus robots. I was like, oh, I don't want to read this. So that was like my attitude going into it. I would say within the first 10 or 15 minutes of listening, I was like laughing out loud with like some of the humor. I'm like, actually, I really am enjoying the humor, the irony. I felt like Charles was just like this little golden retriever character that like I just really enjoyed him. So I think, and then I think it may not have been rated as high either if I weren't just like society's situations that are going on right now. I know we have a lot of listeners that aren't in the US, but like send help. No. But like it's just, it seems there was a lot of topics, there's a lot of like really mic drop quotes, there was a lot of like just politically societally appropriate things for what we're all dealing with right now, and I think it's always, it's, at least for me, has been very front of mind. It's hard for it not to be in the last few months. And so reading it at this time in America and dealing with all of the things happening, I don't know that I would have rated it as high as I did had I read it a couple years ago.
It's funny because I'm the opposite
You're
of
the
that.
opposite how?
So, and I was talking to Michael and I was telling him, I was like, I think the reason why I was struggling with this was because of what's going on. Like, for me, reading is a source of,
Yes, I
for
know.
me to
Yeah.
get away,
To get away. Yeah.
because, and it's all this stuff is so like prevalent and like constantly on my mind that like for me reading is a source of me to just decompress and get out. And reading it while this is going on, and literally seeing like this is what is happening to us as a society, and like all the pointed things that he is discussing and the themes that he is discussing is very relevant. And it just, I'm already at like a base here, and I don't want to be reminded of that. And so that's, I think, I know that's why I also struggled with it, because it's like slapping me in the face, and it's like I don't
Yeah.
like, let me just not like, let me give me my my fire breathing dinosaurs or stuff.
Yeah.
Like I need that escapism, and it wasn't an escape for me. And so I struggled with that, because it's like I know, like I don't need a book to tell me this, I know. And it was hard. So I also recognize that. And so it's funny that it's the opposite for me. Like maybe if I read this obviously the book wasn't out,
Just
but
came
if
out.
this
Yeah.
came out like 3 years ago and we weren't dealing with this, I feel like I would feel a lot different about the book than current times.
Yeah. I mean, I think I like to read as an escape as well, but I think I also like enjoy reading things that I resonate with, in the sense that, and this is going to potentially bring those kind of reflections and things, or prompt people that may otherwise not think about the parallels to think about them. And I think it's helpful for me to like feel like, no, there are people out here too that just have seen the patterns and don't want them to repeat, and all of those things. But I think yeah, I think I appreciated a lot of the quotes in here just because of that. I think Barbara's probably gonna hate the next month's pick, so we should maybe pivot that since nobody started it yet, because it's a lot of political stuff. So between that and just like how lovely Uncharles was to me, I just really liked his character. I thought he was hilarious. I really enjoyed like his quirkiness, and I just I think I rated it higher because of how much I thought I was going to hate it. And then I was like
It's a
pleasantly
pleasant
surprised.
surprise. Yeah.
Yeah. So probably gave it a little higher score than I would have if I started reading it and was like looking forward to reading it, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
But
I'm glad you liked it. So those are our individual scores. For the group score for this one, it ended up being an 8.33333333333. Repeating. Let's wrap this episode up. Make sure you're following Badass Literature for free in your favorite podcast app. Give us a rating and leave us a review if they allow you to. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. Our handle on both Instagram, Facebook, and Goodreads is at Badass Lit Pod. Barbara, bring us home.
Michael, confirmed.
I
Have
love
feedback
that.
about today's episode.
That was awesome.
You can contact us by writing to badassliteraturesociety@gmail.com. You can also send us a DM or leave a comment on any of our plethora of social handles Michael just read off to you.
As always, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you again next month. I'm Michael.
I'm Barbara.
And I'm Lauren.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.